This is Eddie Hearn, Matchroom Boxing. You're watching Sporting Icons. You don't need to be anywhere else.
Now, I know that a lot of you guys have asked me my thoughts on Eddie Hearn saying that Anthony Joshua may actually cancel April 13th at Wembley Stadium and in fact go to New York to take on big baby Jarrell Miller instead. Now, rather than go through all Eddie Hearn's statement, I'll put the article for this particular subject in the description box. Go have a read for Eddie Hearn's statement. Now, the thing is, I don't quite understand why, to be honest. But at the same time, he did explain the fact that it's an unlikely scenario. But of course, a lot of people are saying, but why is it that he's going to go fight Jarrell Miller, but not Wilder in America? And it's a fair point. It is a fair point. Because for me, originally, because we've never had undisputed on British soil before, it was a case of, well, for us as a selfish British point of view, I would like undisputed on British soil. So that's why I was always backing that it must be Joshua versus Wilder in the UK first, before, if there's a rematch, then fine, America, I can't complain about that. But before we get into any of that, just remember that Eddie Hearn and Anthony Joshua have put in an offer to Deontay Wilder to double his highest ever purse, whatever that may be. Some people say that he earned 14 million. I can't see it against Deontay Wilder, but some say he did. So therefore, Joshua's going to give him a guaranteed 28 million with an upside, of course, so he can start earning more on top of that once it hits past certain pay-per-views. And of course, there will be a guaranteed rematch in America, with the main clause being that we fight April 13th, Wembley Stadium first. So for me, I see that as a fair enough offer. It's a fair point. Joshua is a unified heavyweight champion. He owns 3 of the main 4 belts, and he is A-side. It doesn't matter how you look at it. It doesn't matter whether you support Joshua or you don't. It's a fact he is the A-side, so therefore he does call the rights to say, listen, I am the A-side here. I am the one bringing the more attention to it. Therefore, I deserve A-side rights, and I choose to have this fight in the UK first. Nothing wrong with that. And for those who say that Joshua is not a real world champion because he doesn't travel, well, nor does Wilder. He has never defended his belt outside America, whereas Joshua has defended his belt outside of England. He's fought at the Principality Stadium in Cardiff, Wales, against Carlos Takam, originally supposed to be Kubrat Pulev, and of course against Joseph Parker. And yes, for those of you who pointed out on my previous video where I said that he hasn't fought in England for a while, I did forget while I was making that Povetkin was in fact in London. Okay, which I did actually put a comment. If you guys look at the screen as I say that, I did say actually he fought Povetkin in London. But anyway, that aside, for me, there's no reason why the fight shouldn't happen in the UK first. He's exercising his A-side rights. For those Wilder fans, just remember, how many times did Andre Ward leave America? How many times did Floyd Mayweather leave America? You see, because these guys were the A-side, right? That's just how it is. I know a lot of people are stuck in the old school ways where, Lennox Lewis and Frank Bruno had to go to America for the huge fights. And listen, I get that. I do get it, but times are changing. Unfortunately, boxing is no longer popping as much as what it was in America. But ultimately, hopefully it will. Hopefully it will. And I agree. I think Joshua should travel to America at some point. But against Jarrell Miller, again, Eddie Hearn did say that it's an unlikely scenario. For that to happen, Wilder would have to refuse Joshua for Wembley. But also, he did say that there's a potential that if Wilder just point blank refuses to come to the UK, then we'll look at maybe Joshua going to America. We know Wilder doesn't want to come to the UK. Doesn't matter what he says. He's made that abundantly clear that he just doesn't. Okay, so... And you know what? He's within his rights. He is a champion. He doesn't have to unify against Joshua. He doesn't have to do anything. But ultimately, why is it that Joshua should travel but Wilder shouldn't? Do you know what I mean? But against Miller, rather than Wilder, I do get the impression that Eddie Hearn is more interested in Joshua going to America and take on Miller than he is going to America to take on Wilder. And that's pretty much how I see it. That's how I read it. But is there a good enough one for it to be a case of it should be his debut against Miller? Because as I said, and I keep touching on it, so I may as well finish it off, that it's an unlikely scenario. So for Joshua to go fight Miller in Brooklyn, because or in America in general, because he loved Madison Square Garden when Canelo fought Rocky Fielding. He loved the atmosphere. It's something that they didn't think existed in America anymore, because when you go to America, everything's pretty subdued in the boxing crowd. But other events, it's very animated, but at boxing events, not so much at times. But anyway, for this fight to happen, it's a case of Wilder's going to have to refuse to come to the UK, or just refuse to fight Joshua in general. Tyson Fury's also going to have to refuse. Dillian White won't be an option anymore, and maybe a Usyk won't be an option too. So maybe they will look at Miller in that scenario. So it is a long shot, but still a possibility, hence the reason why you guys want me to talk about it. So Joshua going to America to fight big baby Jarrell Miller. He's an undefeated heavyweight. Why not? I have no issue with it. Much like now, because we've already had undisputed with Usyk versus Bellew here on the UK soil, I can't really use that issue anymore to say that, well, we need undisputed on British soil. Technically, I kind of could, because Bellew didn't win. In other words, a new undisputed champion wasn't crowned, or two champions didn't come together to become undisputed. So we still haven't had that bit. So if Wilder and Joshua fight in the UK, then that's one champion Wilder, one champion Joshua come together, a crowned undisputed champion on British soil. So from that point of view, we still haven't had that bit. But at the same time, I can understand people saying, but you've had Usyk versus Bellew. I do get it, okay? But for him to go fight Miller, it's a good starting point, that's for sure. And Joshua should travel to America at some point. We shouldn't be keeping him here. It's not because of favoritism with judges. I mean, he's only been a distance once, so people can't really say too much about judging. Although some people have said that on a couple of fights up until the stoppage, the judges had him winning when then he shouldn't have. But most notably against Vladimir Klitschko and things like that. But you know what? Until it actually goes to points, you don't know. So again, I mean, just look at Kell Brook versus Errol Spence. I mean, for me, I had Kell Brook winning, even though he did get injured in round number 6. But the judges had it different to what I had it. They were having Errol Spence winning. So had it gone the distance, Errol Spence would have won anyway. So it's not like we screw foreign fighters, okay? Sometimes it happens. I ain't going to deny it, but that's all countries. But again, for Miller versus Joshua, it's a good opening statement, but one not to be overlooked either. It is still dangerous. But if Wilder's saying, okay, come to America, and you know what, here's 50 million, and yes, you can have all your rights with your sponsors at ringside and your advertisements, and yes, it will be shown in the UK on Sky Sports, and he says no, it ends up fighting Miller, then yes, that's a little bit odd. That's what I have to say. It is odd looking. Obviously, until that scenario happens, we don't know exactly what details would have caused that fight to have broken down. But if given the option, Wilder in America or Miller in America, why would you not go for Wilder? Do you know what I mean? Whereas before I understood it because it was about undisputed. And maybe it is still about undisputed on British soil for Joshua. So maybe that is a good enough reason. And it is a good enough reason. Because America have had plenty of undisputed champions crowned on their soil. But against Miller, it's an interesting one, and one that, while Miller is tough, he will dog Joshua, but I expect Miller to have totally different tactics against Joshua. But if he comes steaming in and gets hit flushed like he does or did against Bogdan Dinu and fighters previous, then Joshua will take him apart. There's no way Miller or any man on the planet can take Joshua's punches. They just can't. They really can't. But how well would Miller and Joshua go down in America? I don't quite know the popularity of Big Baby Jarrell Miller, but from an outside point of view, when I look at the heavyweights, and I'm a huge fan of American fighters in general, like people seem to overlook that bit because I talk about Joshua and Tyson Fury and Dillian White and from up and down the weight classes, British predominantly. That doesn't mean because I'm a British fanboy that I dislike others, not at all. It's just that it's Wilder that gets under my skin with the way that he goes on. He acts very, very feminine and not like a champion. That's just in my opinion. But I like American fighters. I've always loved American fighters. Mike Tyson was like one of my favorite fighters of all time. Although as a kid, I hated him because he intimidated the crap out of me. I'm a very small child with this guy. But Miller and Joshua, how well would it do stateside? Obviously, this is a thing for DAZN. Obviously, DAZN, if they want Joshua rights, of course, they have first refusal over all UK Matchroom pay-per-views. Much like Dillian Whyte and Derek Chisora this weekend, they have first refusal. So the 16 shows that they bought into with Matchroom from the UK isn't inclusive of the pay-per-views. They get first refusal and last refusal on the pay-per-view. But they didn't accept the Dillian Whyte versus Derek Chisora one because they felt that people in America weren't really that bothered too much about it. There'll be a few people that would love to see it, but ultimately, would there be enough to get new subscribers? I don't know. I mean, I don't really know the landscape too well. All I hear from Americans is boxing just isn't popping. And Joshua isn't popping in America right now. That's not to say he won't, but we know that Wilder isn't popping either. And we know that Miller isn't popping. Okay, if popping is even a word, right? But you get what it is that I'm talking about. So I feel, though, that Miller would be a good start. Not to be overlooked, of course, but I do feel that Joshua could go over there and get the victory. No doubt. But I feel if he did it against Wilder, he's going to have to stop Wilder. Because Wilder versus Tyson Fury, we could see that even though Tyson Fury did get dropped on 2 occasions, getting dropped on 2 occasions is not enough to win a 12-round fight. And if anybody disagrees with that, then you need to be looking up the rules of how to score a fight for judging. Okay, Wilder would have had to have won another 2 to 3 rounds within that. And did he? That's the biggest question, right? For me, no, he didn't. And Joshua's going to have to be exactly the same. And for me, I feel that they are so desperate to keep hold of Wilder as an American heavyweight champion that they will do anything and pull out all stops to ensure that victory, especially with the WBC. But there again, would they do that for Miller? That's where I think Eddie Hearn's looking at it going, well, probably not. So if it does go the distance, I think they'll probably score it fairly. And that's just my opinion. I don't know that, do I? Or they may well score it in Joshua's favour, being that Joshua is one of the main flag bearers for DAZN, along with Canelo and Usyk. So, yeah, anyway, that's the news. So, as I said, article in the description box for you guys to have a little read for Eddie Hearn's statement about Joshua potentially cancelling April 13th at Wembley and instead going to Brooklyn or Madison Square Garden, wherever. That's in Manhattan, isn't it? Or something, or I don't know. Anyway, to go fight big baby Jarrell Miller. So for me, depending on all kinds of other things, I suppose, from a person outside looking in, I suppose, I would prefer it if Joshua was going to go to America to fight Wilder. But unless there's legitimate reasons, I can certainly see why Miller would be one of those. If not, maybe Adam Kaunaki. That would be a pretty good one as well. Anyway, that's the news. That's my thoughts. You drop me yours as always. Click the thumbs up on this video and subscribe. Catch you all on the next video.